Welcome everybody to the Music Teachers Association webinar about the National Plan for Music Education, the refreshed National Plan, I should say. And this session is for those colleagues who are working in and with primary education. All teachers are welcome, whether you are a classroom teacher, whether you are someone who exclusively teaches music, or whether you're working with primary music teachers, welcome and thank you for joining us today. I always think it's just absolutely astounding when people have energy to still come to sessions and engage with professional learning at 5 o'clock at the end of a long term, at the end of a very long year. So a very warm welcome and thank you for making time for today. Again, if you haven't been part of an MTA session before, a very warm welcome to you. It's a great organisation which is always really so passionate about engaging with the wider sector. We are stronger together. That's a cheesy thing to say, but it's true. We're here. It's an organisation run by teachers for teachers, supporting those, connecting those, and hoping to inspire the profession in what they do for children and young people. On this session today, there's me. I'll introduce myself. My name is Catherine Barker. I'm the president-elect of the Music Teachers Association, but most importantly, in my day job, I'm the head of music and performing arts for a large national schools group called United Learning. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Also on the call, we have Anna Haywood joining us, who is the music lead at Hanwell Fields. And I just popped out of my head. Anna, tell me where you work. Hillview Primary Schools. I should know that because I work with you. It's been a long few days. But Anna, it's great to have you here. And Anna is featured in the case studies in the National Plan and Anna's schools and how she works across 2 schools as a primary music teacher. We also have joining us, by the magic of technology, Jimmy Rotherham, where he sadly couldn't join us live because he's involved in another conference in London today, but he has pre-recorded the session and I'll be sharing that as part of this evening's activities. So let's get started, and I'm going to begin by talking to you about the plan itself. So I was very fortunate to be invited to be part of the expert panel for the plan, and the expert panel was made up of a wide group of people who are incredibly passionate about music education and coming at it from lots of different perspectives. You can read more about that online and in the plan, but just to give you a brief taste, really, there was a group of teachers working in schools, primary and secondary, academies and free schools, quite a mix. There were representatives from the music hubs, Phil Castang from Bristol, and as well up in the north with Karen and Baxendale up in Manchester, and others who worked across with hubs, with Arts Council and Music Mark as well, who is the kind of the professional organisation for the music hubs. And also there were representatives from the national youth organisations for music, and also from the music sector itself, people working in industry like the wonderful Yolanda and others. And also, interestingly, there were lots of civil servants. Now, as a music teacher, I hadn't really come across lots of people like that before in my life, but it's been really interesting experience. And interestingly, with the National Plan, we had civil servants who were from the DFE and from the DCMS, so from education and from arts and culture. And apparently this is very unusual that they work together in that way. They can be a bit siloed. So what an exciting development and a really positive way forwards that within the kind of policy landscape, they were working together as well. So just a little taster, just to give you a feel of where it came from. And before I go more into about the detail of it, I think it's worth reflecting on how something like this, how it comes about and where it came from. So you might not be aware that the original plan was put together in 2011 following a review by Darren Henley, who is the chair of the Arts Council, where he looked really broadly across all music education to get kind of state of the nation, like a flavour for what was happening. And the main change that came out of the first plan was that music services started to look more broadly to become music hubs, because what was really identified was that the provision across the country, even across smaller areas, regions, could be a bit patchy, and we wanted to try and they at that time wanted to try and guarantee more of a consistent offer for young people across the country, and to get people to work together. Now that is clearly repeated in this plan, but it's interesting to see where it came from. And since then, there's been quite a lot of changes, and not only have we got things that have happened more recently, but the education landscape itself has shifted. So, for example, where I work, we've got the increased number of academies. We've got some changes in terms of how things are developed, particularly in primary schools. We've got whole class ensemble tuition. There's more research and data around that. Things have moved on. We know more about what's been happening. With all that learning, I think there were surveys as well that were done as part of this. There was a call for evidence. The ISM also have done lots of research over the past 10 years. All of that was drawn together, but I certainly was acutely aware of the current challenges for schools. We are, as we went into the process reflecting on the plan, it was in the middle of the pandemic. And we're coming towards the end of the pandemic, and we're still sort of dealing with this as music teachers. It's a tough time, isn't it? That either before the pandemic, you would have been, beginning to grow things and things working quite well in your school. And as soon as COVID hit, there was a huge impact on people's view of music and musical learning. Can we sing? Can we not sing? Are we in bubbles? Are we not in bubbles? We all knew that's been really, really tough, and that has taken a while to come through and to manage. Alongside that, the one of the really big challenges is that even if your school was really strong, you had to start rebuilding again and building people's confidence to start doing music making, and also just not used to doing it, and putting on concerts, putting on events. When did you last do an in-person nativity? It's been a while, and remembering how all those bits work and getting the parents in and getting that all to function has been tricky. We've had a lot of quite a few years of online and videoed concerts, so people have learnt different skills, but it's been a challenge. It really has stretched a lot of us to our limit. Not only that, but budgets are really tight across the school sector, and music just echoes and reflects whatever is going on in the wider sector. And conditions are quite tough. Certainly in secondary schools, attendance has been a really big problem this year, and drawing in young people who might have become less passionate about their learning. That lockdown experience has landed heavily in a lot of settings, and in some schools in our country, fixed term exclusions are really concerning alongside attendance, and that is also the case at primary. It's higher than it's ever been. So all of this is really worrying. It's a tough landscape, but there is so much potential. We know that there is huge amounts of passion and enthusiasm for music education, just simply seen by the fact that we have nearly 70 people on this call when on a Tuesday evening in July. It just is absolutely brilliant to have so many people who are engaged with professional learning and for wanting to do a really great job for your schools. And actually that's what we need, isn't it? Because if we don't do it, who will? Like, it's within our gift to act on this and to reflect and to sort of take the plan with both hands and run with it. And we have this plan. This is a really good thing. There are lots of subjects who don't have a national strategy. Music is one of the few that does. There is a sports strategy, a sports national plan for next year, and a cultural education plan. But I talk to drama teachers, I talk to art teachers, and they're really, they would love to have the kind of advocacy around the subjects that we do. I think we should feel really fortunate about that. We have the model music curriculum, which has come out in the past couple of years, slightly contentious, but it's there. And that, again, is a level of advocacy for music education being in schools and for serving a purpose in our schools, doing all the great things that we know it can do. So there's lots of support and advocacy around our subject, which we can harness. And also, most importantly, there is green shoots all over the country where people have been rebuilding provision. And, things like Young Voices, who are up and running again. I'm sure many of you have been involved in that this year. There's wonderful experiences and big sings in your local communities. But the striking thing about these events is that people have really felt what it's like to come back to that. You look at the experience with Glastonbury last weekend and other concerts that are happening and festivals beginning to come through in communities this summer. And I think that is one of the most powerful things. Everyone appreciates and knows what they've missed, and they don't want to lose it. Now it's back. And I anticipate that there'll be a big push on enrichment, co-curricular, and the wider case for the wider curriculum next year. So in all of this context, where things have been tough, but there's a lot of potential, what does a national plan need to do? Well, I went into the panel with 3 priorities, thinking about how we could get more security for the subject and try and draw more funding towards the subject. I was really thinking about the structural issues about timetable, like guaranteeing it's going to happen, and in secondary schools about the qualifications that young people do. And then finally about this clarity about roles. Who is supposed to do what? What's the hub responsible for? What does the hub actually do? What does the service do? What do teachers do? What does the sector do? Where is everyone's responsibility? What's normal? What's more than normal? What's not quite good enough? We need clarity. So I went in with some, almost like non-negotiables, things that I felt really passionate about from what I'd been reading and researching and hearing from teachers. Some of those I wasn't able to push on, sadly, but a lot of them were, and it was a real honour to be part of that process. And I think everyone around the table took that responsibility incredibly seriously. And really striking was that around the table, there was a real sense that everybody wanted to come to some kind of consensus, however we could. And the DFE and the DCMS really were in listening mode, as well as the chair, Veronica, who really is quite a formidable chair and did a fantastic job. So to what extent have those issues been addressed? What does it mean for schools? Well, I think the thing that sings out really loudly to us and for us as educators is that schools are at the heart of this plan. If you read it, the journey starts with EYFS, Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3. It's all about the school journey. And whilst the plan is very long, this is not good, and it was launched on a Saturday, also not good. There were some bits of clarity that I think we can quite easily focus in on and have as something that, if you're not going to read all 80 pages to start off with, focus in on this bit, because I think this is the most important bit. There's these 7 key features of provision. So the first one being timetabled curriculum music of at least 1 hour each week of the school year from key stages 1 to 3. Now, in a primary school, that doesn't necessarily mean 1 hour for the year ones. Can you imagine doing 1 hour of anything with year 1? I personally can't. They need to have it broken up, don't they, over the week? But it's a substantial amount of curriculum time for music. This is going to be a real challenge for lots of schools. We'll talk about that in a second. Access to lessons across a range of instruments and voice. There's content. This is what we're here talking about, is learning to play a musical instrument, which is seen as additional to curriculum time, or even vocal lessons additional to the curriculum time, the actual nuts and bolts of what it is to learn about music and be more musical. Then there's some detail about ensembles that schools could and should have as part of their musical offer. A school choir or a vocal ensemble. Many schools have that. School ensemble or a band. So something which is more of an instrumental ensemble. We're not necessarily talking about a full symphony orchestra here. It's going to be contextual, isn't it? Based on your community, based on your pupils, but recognizing the benefits of playing music together, how it often keeps young people learning and thriving together. There's also points about space for rehearsals and practice. Possibly easier in a secondary school to think about that, but I think there's certainly a case for thinking about this in primary schools. How the extended day is used, how you can open up your building to external providers to ensure that young people can have that access, especially when thinking about what might be or not be available in the local community. termly school performances, very common in lots of schools, as well as celebrating product as well as the process. It's really important to have that landing moment. And then the final key feature being the opportunity to enjoy live performance at least once a year. Isn't it wonderful when visiting musicians can come into your school, whether they're drawn in by the hub or by other links to community partners and links that people have in their area, because it's so inspiring for young people to see live music. So I think that this clarity, these simple statements are a really good starting point for schools. We've got this happening, but not this. Why not? How can we make it possible? How can we be even better at what we do? But as I said, some schools are going to find this really challenging, and I recognise, and everyone around the panel was keenly aware that smaller schools and primary schools are going to find this tough, and the sector is going to need to listen really hard and offer support where it's possible. And I think that is built into the plan. There are plans for CPD, for partnerships, for collaboration, for industry links. And so those of you who are on a call like this, you're the engaged people who are going to pick up and make these links. And that is what's going to be a really important way of making this come to life. There are also expectations around subject leadership, how music should be represented, not in a leadership structure as in on the SLT, but recognizing that it needs somebody to pull it all together, to make those links, to work with the freelancers who might be coming in to teach, to liaise with the hub, to think about those, like, what are the pathways for those young people you recognize who've got real ambition and talent and interest in music, someone for parents to go to when they have questions. So leadership is really important, and that needs nurture and support. Also, expectations around these music development plans. So this is I don't want to say a document, that sounds really bland, but essentially a school setting out what is their ambition for music, how are they doing it, how are they funding it, how are they making sure that it is inclusive, that you're thinking in a sort of planned and what they would say strategic way about your music area, and also reflecting the strengths of what you do, what you already do. So hopefully schools are already using the language of school improvement like the development plan, so it shouldn't be duplication of work, but it's something that could form a really good part of a conversation with a local music hub, because after all, if they know what your needs are, they'll know how to tailor their offer. My analysis of this often is that a hub will say, this is our offer, like on a plate, and you have to find out what you can take from the buffet. Actually, it's much more powerful when you say, well, these are my needs, how can we work together? It's a much better sort of service they can provide. And there are going to be these lead schools who work in partnership with the hub on CPD and support. So schools with really high quality provision will be identified to do that. I know lots of schools are going to be excited by this, partly because of the status that it provides. I think we do need to be clear, it's about adding capacity to a hub. So where you are able to support and have influence and impact beyond your school site, that it's probably best for those schools. So they can share good practice and host people and do all that kind of stuff that we know is really impactful. And there are already hubs for maths and behaviour and languages. So it's kind of similar to set up for other subjects. There's more information to come about that shortly. So returning to the question, did it address those concerns that I had as we're coming into this round of the refresh plan? Funding, structures and clarity? I think hopefully yes. There is more funding. There's £25 million has been put towards new musical instruments and adapted musical instruments. That's really exciting, isn't it? Because there's a lot of stock that sits with schools and music hubs that is now not fit for purpose. So they're going to be able to replenish and bring that back bring more stuff into action, but also so that a music offer can be as inclusive as possible. So like one-handed instruments, all sorts of use of technology, which I know will really open up and invigorate the curriculum for young people who previously not been able to do that. There's been so many developments in that area. It's really exciting. And also there's this music progression fund. All of this was totally unexpected. We didn't actually think there was going to be any money behind the plan, but they've managed to find some money in the Levelling Up Fund. So there are the 50 areas for that nationally. And I think that could have quite a lot of impact if it's done well. again, waiting for more information, but and hopefully it will come through and will get confirmed over the next few months. Have the structural issues been addressed? I think the recognition about weekly music provision, which is in the modern music curriculum, which is also in the Ofsted Research Review, all of that just echoes the same message. It's very clear. And if it isn't happening weekly and regularly in a school, I think they're going to be, it starts a difficult conversation, I think, whether that's at governance level or on inspection. Being clear about the route from EYFS, Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3, and then what comes next, I think that's really powerful. It's easy for everyone to understand, but shows what progression routes are all about and how everyone builds into the wider journey for young people. And there is clarity. So I think that it clearly explains who's responsible for what and how all the different bits fit together. So for colleagues working in secondary schools to understand what happens in primary schools, for primary schools to understand where they're sending the young people out into. And if you're an ECT or a head teacher who's new to headship and you've never seen really great music, I think it's just it's a good document to summarize what we are aiming for and where we're all heading together. So I think it delivers on that clarity. But we are all going to need to work together and be quite honest with ourselves as we reflect where we're at the moment. And that's what those development plans are about next year. I'll talk a bit more about that at the end of the session, but that's the sort of key takeaways for schools, and hopefully you have found that a useful summary. There is a one-page summary on the MTA website, which I will show you how to access at the end of the session. Right, I have spoken way too long. I'm now going to share with you the pre-recording that I did with Jimmy, so just bear with me while I'm going to just put up I need to pop the video on. Thank you for joining us today, Jimmy. It's really great to have you contributing to this webinar. We can read about the provision at your school in the case study, but I think it's really useful to hear more about what's behind the case study. Firstly, can you talk a little bit about what was your route into this kind of role, and then sort of how everything has been built up at the school over time?
Yeah, so for me, I was a secondary teacher and then I moved to teaching A level. That was great until the cuts came in, and then I was being asked increasingly more and more asked to do more for less. So I ended up doing 70-hour weeks, getting paid for 3 days, and I thought this is just bonkers. Yeah. So I actually quit teaching. I'd had enough by that point. I was kind of overworked and underappreciated, like a lot of music teachers are, unfortunately. And they offered voluntary redundancies. I absolutely bit their hand off and said, right, that's teaching done for me. I'm going to go and be a musician. If it was the weekend all the time, it would have been absolutely fine. But I was kind of struggling for work, so I started sort of during the week. So I started doing a bit of supply teaching during the week. Ended up landing in some primary settings and some special needs settings, and that really rekindled my love for teaching. Really enjoyed it and really saw the power of it. I remember I was in a special school, and a little boy came in. Everyone in the class had sort of profound and multiple learning difficulties, and I think everybody in the group was autistic. And a little boy came in and started just rolling on the floor and growling in a kind of in a way that sounded like it was quite damaging to his voice. And he's kind of just going, ah, and kind of seemed in a lot of distress. The second I started playing the piano, he just calmed down, and then he came over and he leant on the piano, and was just listening away like he was in a speakeasy in the 1920s, just clicking along to the jazz. And all the staff would, the jaws dropped, and he's like, how on earth, what have you done? And all I was doing was playing the piano. It's really as simple as that. And I thought, wow, if we can get these sort of results just from playing the piano to some children, what would a bit of structured work over a long period be like? And luckily I landed at Feversham on supply. Met a head teacher who was just willing to say yes to everything I asked for. So when I started, it was like a lot of schools. They had a chap coming in to play guitar. He kind of bashed out a few Beatles songs with the musical children. So the musical children are obviously those children who, in one lesson, they start to understand things. They aren't necessarily over the long term going to be your best musicians, but traditionally it's always been the people with the immediate obvious ability get chosen to do music, and everyone else is told you're not musical, sort of go away. So I immediately said to him, well, the way we're doing it is just ridiculous. We're not including everybody. We can't have music for the few. And he completely agreed. He just started at the school as the head teacher as well. And it's quite a well documented story, but we're in measures a really failing school. When he took over, he wanted to put the arts dead at the centre of what we do. So it was just a dream for a music teacher, because he just said yes to everything. So I said, well, we can't do it for one afternoon a week. So my hours grew to 2 days, and quickly to 3 days, and then to 4 days, so that we could teach a good music program across the school. And we could develop a choir, we could develop singing groups and things like that. But I also found that as a secondary specialist, I wasn't necessarily equipped to. I think, like a lot of secondary specialists, you're probably reasonably confident doing stuff with years 5 and 6, but then class full of 3-year-olds, what on earth do you do? So I started looking into sort of approaches specifically for working with very young children and beginners, things like Kadai and Dalcroze and Orff, which have just supplied me with so many powerful tools. I can't recommend training enough in Kadai and Dalcroze in particular for primary teachers. And then the magic just started to happen. Children started to make really good progress with the music, but it still wasn't enough for me, because I was seeing the classes once a week. What tends to happen is, you can spend half your session just getting the class warmed up and singing in tune, and fine tuning them and things, and that can be your entire lesson. And then you see them a week later, they've forgotten everything. You tune them up again. Because you spent your last session tuning the class up, you've not had a lot of time to kind of do any learning content, and it's all been forgotten, and that wasn't working. So I started seeing the classes 3 times a week, and was kind of spread quite thinly. And to say it had a remarkable effect on the school is an understatement, and it wasn't just it wasn't just a music teacher coming in and delivering music and disappearing. It was a whole school culture. We started having music assemblies with visiting musicians, and fantastic opportunities for the children to see live performances, and a culture in school where everybody's a musician. So that meant training the staff up as well. And also, once we started to have a lot of success with this, we wanted to have a model that other schools could follow. And unfortunately, a lot of schools don't have a music specialist, and this has always been a big concern, because there's only, I think, one place now at Reading where you can train to be a primary music specialist. So there's very few of us around. And also, there's very few jobs for us in state schools as well, which is quite sad. And almost everybody I know who does what I do does it in a private school, because that's where the demand is, that's where the jobs are. It's ridiculous that private school children have, teenagers who really value music and really see the benefits. In primary schools, we've got this narrow accountability for English and maths. So that's some schools, that's all they do. And when we were in special measures, that's all we were doing. We were doing booster classes for English and maths at lunchtime and after school. And the more we did of that, the worse the results got, because the curriculum was such a narrow, boring, dull experience for the children. Fast forward sort of 8 years later, we are one of the top schools in the country for pupil progress. We're in the top 1%. School children making incredible progress, and it's because they're not just sat around all day drilling English and maths. They're getting up, they're moving, they're singing, they're expressing themselves, they're developing their confidence, they're developing their well-being, they're developing their social skills, and all this has an incredible effect on children's general education. So, as I say, we wanted to kind of use a model that other schools could use. So that meant me kind of taking a step back and taking more of a coaching role in coaching up the staff in school. And what we found was, which I think a lot of people will find if they've tried to do this sort of thing, is that it will be quite patchy. So you'll have some teachers who kind of leap onto it with boundless enthusiasm and really progress. And I've seen teachers go from this year actually, from in September not being able to sing in tune, and really struggling with delivering music in the class, to then 6 months later with this regular partnership working with them to develop their skills. You'd watch them teaching music now and you'd think they've been teaching primary music for a decade, and you think they're a specialist, and they're going do so perfect fifth, do la major sixth, and they're able to name all these intervals and sing them perfectly, and it's incredible. And it's because everybody's musical, and once you get past that barrier of people thinking that they're not musical, then they can really fly. But you will get one or two really reluctant teachers who are going to do everything they can not to teach music and to avoid teaching it. So what we find is if you set up people in each phase of school, so we've got 2 people in early years who've done a foundation certificate in Kodai methodology and musicianship, and that's been brilliant for them. In Key Stage 1, we've got somebody who's been through the level 1, which is slightly higher qualification, and someone in working with years 3 and 4, and some working with one working with years 5 and 6. And what that means is they're then really empowered, and they can fill in those little gaps where music might not be happening. So that's worked really well. We've recently started to put in other schools, and that's been incredible, just seeing how well class teachers, if you empower them with the training and the confidence, how well they can deliver music. And it's such a shame that they're not getting that on their PGC courses, they're not getting it with a lot of CPD, and a lot of music provision it's kind of siloed and separate, isn't it? It's the music teacher comes in, they're completely ignored, and I experience this all the time. I had a girl who was working out Chopin pieces by ear in a school where I was teaching piano, and the school just were not interested at all. I said, could she do a performance to the school? Oh, we don't do that. But you could do it. You could let her perform in assembly. No, we don't do music in assembly. And there's just this fixed mindset of music doesn't happen, which is really sad to see. When I was on supply in a school once, I came in with a piano and carrying a big piano with me, and I was on general supply, so they were really suspicious. And they looked at the piano like I brought in a machete or something, and said, what are you going to do with that? And I said, well, I thought I'm going to put it on my head. What do you think I'm going to do? I was going to do some songs with the children, maybe. You won't have time to do that. And it was a year 4 class, and they were giving them year 6 practice SATs papers all morning. I said, when I finish those, can I do a song? No, when you finish those, here's another big pile of practice SATs papers. So it was a pretty miserable morning, and then I thought, hey, we've got something fun in the afternoon. Guess what we had in the afternoon? Big pile of SATs papers. So we eventually got through all those and all the reserve stuff we had, and I did 10 minutes of singing with them right at the end of the day. When I got home, I got a call from the supply agency saying, this school do not want you to come back. You did not follow the instructions. They made it very clear that you were not to do any music in this, and you defied them. And yeah, I did. Yeah, okay, I'll go back in the school. But that's sort of anti-music attitude that a lot of music specialists are facing in schools. If you get that far, for a lot of schools, there's just absolutely nothing happening. And part of the problem is that Ofsted have not held them to account for a long time. They've ignored music. I often ask the question when I do a talk at a conference, how many of you here have actually had an Ofsted inspection where they've actually come and seen a music lesson? And it's always, maybe 1 or 2 people. What has made a big difference is the potential for deep dives in music. Yeah. And that's really made schools step up their game. And I think actually that's had more of an effect than the model music curriculum, or than probably the national plan will, because it's about accountability. So when schools are held accountable for the music, they will take it seriously, and actually they'll do it well. But if they're not being measured on it, and it doesn't matter, and they go through we're kind of all fighting a system that's almost got a mind of its own. I don't think there's very few people who don't want children to experience a good music education, but it's almost like everybody's fighting a system that kind of runs itself, and it becomes a self-perpetuating system because people go through training, they don't do any music, they're kind of indirectly taught that music doesn't matter in school. They then become school leaders, they then become teacher trainers, and the whole thing just becomes this closed loop which music is completely left out of.
Mm.
So I'm hoping, things seem to be moving in the right direction, and that's quite exciting. And there's lots
Yeah.
of brilliant things in the National Plan for Music Education. It just depends whether the funding is going to be there, and how that works, and how schools and music clubs are going to be held to account for it. Are
Yeah.
they going to be held to account for it? Is it optional? Is it compulsory? Is it suggested? There's a lot of shoulds and coulds.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it evolves over the next 10 years, just like your own provision evolved from right from the ground up and has got to where you are today. Let's kind of, I think it's good to be optimistic about what is possible no matter what context you're in. I suppose you've spoken about the challenges with staffing and the structural challenges of the system, but one area where there is quite a lot of potential, it's not mentioned so much in the plan, is the power of engagement from community and parents. Could you just tell us a little bit about what your experience has been in that area, and what do you think has had most impact with your community?
Yeah, so I think, to give an extreme example, I think it, it's quite easy to kind of follow a system that's maybe designed in Hungary, or Geneva or somewhere like that, and whilst there's great pedagogy, there's not always that kind of local connection with repertoire choices and things like that. And this has been a really big learning curve for me as well. We've got 98% Pakistani Muslim community. When we first started, it was really interesting for me because I didn't realize how different the views in the community were. So even within the same family, you've got completely different views. And some parents came to us very concerned that music was haram and it was dangerous. It was going to take the children away from Allah. It was going to take them away from the studies. It was going to distract them from, developing. And there isn't a culture of music making within the community as such. But we did manage to tap into nasheeds. And we talk about cultural capital. There's some expanded views of cultural capital, which is, rather than just being the best of what has been thought and said, the kind of traditional Arnold model, you're also looking at things that have subcultural capital and localized capital. So give you an example. We did a concert. The first concert I did, we had kids playing, either pop songs or classical music, and three parents turned up, and I remember they were on the phones for the entire concert. They didn't even applaud when their own children finished performing, and they were talking all the way through it. And there just wasn't the culture of going to concerts and experiencing them. And also, I wasn't giving them something that appealed to the local community. So we thought, what does have cultural capital in our local community? Food. So really nice food, get the parents in making the brilliant samosas and bagels. That's going to bring loads of people in on its own. And I thought, well, how do we deal with this issue of some parents? And it was only a tiny minority. I think it's a bit of a myth that most Muslims think music isn't something they should be doing. It's absolutely not true. I'd say it's a very small minority, 2%. And then at the other end of that spectrum, you've got a tiny minority of Sufi Muslims, and for a lot of Sufis, music's a kind of core part of their worship and their beliefs and their connection with God. So I was learning a lot about the Quran and things like that, and the Quran states the Quran doesn't say anything about music not being allowed. The Hadiths don't say anything about music not being allowed. What is interesting is all the different levels of interpretation you get. So in one of the Hadiths, Muhammad goes into a wedding, and there's two little girls making music there. They're playing a duff drum, and one's playing a duff drum and the other one is singing. And the people organising the wedding tell them to stop playing. And Muhammad said to them, "No, please carry on. It's a celebration. Carry on. Please don't stop." So some Muslims take that as, if it's good enough for the Prophet, it's good enough for us. There's no problem with it at all. Some Muslims say, well, it's fine as long as it's a wedding. Or a celebration. Some people say it's fine as long as you're a prepubescent girl, but nobody else should be doing it. Really kind of taking it literally. It's fine if you're playing a duff drum or you're singing, but everything else is not allowed. But as I say, we can try and challenge that, but at the end of the day, it's much better to show them other ways. So for me, I spent a lot of time trying to find Muslim musicians willing to come into the school and show rather than tell. So show them that, and let people within their community, put those arguments forward. And we got a nasheed singer in. It absolutely sold. Everyone came to the concert. It was absolutely brilliant. We got a few really famous nasheed singers who were willing to come into the school and talk about how important music is to them and really engage with the community. And that kind of pulled everyone in, and then people started coming to the concerts, and we'd have the choir singing nasheeds instead of pop or classical music, and we'd start to put those some Arabic songs into our curriculum. And I think one of the highlights for me was we did a community concert, and it was an absolute sellout. We had local nasheed singers singing it, and it was very much about me taking a step back there and just letting the community organise it, let them kind of do it and just give the support, work with the choir and work with the musicians, but very much it was the community concert. And we had the whole of the parents singing along with the nasheeds, and to just see this room of previously reluctant parents all singing along and really getting into it, and it was amazing. And also when they see the difference it makes to their children as well, see how engaged the children are, how enthusiastic about it they are. We, as you know, we kind of hit the news quite spectacularly in 2017, and there was if you look back at the videos, which are kind of widely available, there's an amazing drummer who sort of plays drums in a hijab. She was from quite a conservative family who were quite uncertain about it. Now she's hoping to do music A level, and she's got a drum in a cellar, and her parents tolerate her kind of bashing away on the drums in the cellar. And they really get it now. They really see the benefits to her. They see how she's thriving academically. She's super confident. She's got this thing that makes her unique, this ability to play the drums really well, and it's helping her with they can see those tremendous benefits of music. And I think once people start to see those benefits, that's when you'll get the parents on side, you'll get the reluctant teachers on side. Once they start to see it happening with their own children, I think that's the most powerful thing we have as advocates of music education. We can send people research. They probably don't have the time to read it. They might not see how that can connect to what they do in class. Give them the things to do in class, and they see the benefits for their children, and it makes an enormous difference. And then kind of on side permanently then.
And you now have these role models who are not at the school anymore that shows the longer journey, but I suppose that does take time to build up. But what comes across so strongly is your deep knowledge of the community and how you've really invested in your own CPD, not just about what it takes to teach in your community, but also your knowledge of early years, teaching younger students. So I think it really challenges that idea of I've got to go and teach in a school and be totally ready. I've got to be the full package. That isn't the case for any of us, is it? We always are learning and developing, partly because music is an ever-changing creative thing, but it's just the role of being a teacher, isn't it? We're always developing ourselves.
We can't be a Renaissance man, you could, or woman, you could spend your entire life just studying, say, the Kadai approach and in depth, and there's Kadai or Dalcroze, all these different approaches that we can learn so much from, but you can't be, it takes several lifetimes to master all of them, so you can constantly be learning. I mean, I know a lot about Kadai and how to apply that. I know a little bit less about Dalcroze, but I love using lots of that in my sessions, and it's been really powerful for getting children up and moving, and particularly for learning rhythm as well. Movement's so connected to rhythm that it's how people teach rhythm without movement, with kids sitting down in desks, I have no idea. It's made a huge difference to us. And then next year I'm going to be working with lots of orth specialists and kind of swapping skills and learning a little bit more about that approach. So you can always be learning and finding new things, and again, with these approaches, people can be very dogmatic about them, but I like to kind of explore the limitations of them as well. And with Kadai, for example, if you're just following a Kadai singing program, you might not be getting the listening side of things. You might not be exposed them to a wide range of listening opportunities.
Yeah.
You might not be doing that in a fun way. So very much encouraging teachers to listen in a very active way, where children are kind of almost analysing the music through movement, and they're understanding structure because the movements change when the music changes, that sort of thing. I've forgotten my point now.
But it speaks to the nature of just music being, being immersed in music is a really powerful way of understanding that deep lived experience and knowledge comes
Absolutely.
from all methods of transmission. So
I think you can be a brilliant music teacher with a brilliant curriculum, but if you don't have the ecosystem in school and you don't have the support of the leadership, and I see so many ridiculous things in Facebook groups about, oh, my senior leadership have asked me to do this. Why have they asked you to do that? It's such a silly idea, and it's just tell them no. It's a really silly idea. But kind of music teachers in fear of SLT saying, oh, I've got to scrap the kind of really clever sequence of lessons that I've got, and now I've got to just do songs about Vikings. Thank you, senior leaders.
Well, hopefully we've
it can be a subservient. It can be a subservient subject. It's just seen simply to serve and boost the core curriculum, rather than a subject of value in its own right.
Yeah, well, I think the Ofsted Research Review and some of the stuff in the model music curriculum goes to address that, but it does take a lot of analysis, and to make that case to senior leaders, it is, there's not always time. Like you said, sharing the research, sharing all the evidence, it's time consuming. You just have to do it and bring people with you. So there's been it's so helpful to hear about your journey, and I certainly have. I've over the years I've sort of watched you from afar and thought, this is just it's so amazing. But to hear all the pieces that led towards where you are now, I think is really valuable. And no, thank you for sharing that with everybody, both through the case study in the annex and also here today.
But I'd say keep going as well. If you'd have told me when I quit teaching 10 years ago that I would be, nominated for a Global Teacher Prize and all this kind of stuff, I would not have believed anybody. And it's really easy when you're a younger teacher to just see a career trajectory as this nice smooth line, or even musical development as this nice smooth line, when actually it's just this squiggly mess in all kinds of directions, isn't it, for most of us? So you might be at this point and feeling very low, but it's not going to be permanently like that. You might find a different school that's much more supportive. You might have a change of leadership. You might be able to persuade your leadership to take a change of direction. So just don't give up. Just keep soldiering on.
Great, and that's what.
It's always the benefit that I could see for the children that drives me. Drives me to argue with senior leaders, to to kind of pipe up when I'm not happy, to be that only person in school who gets really upset if year 4 don't get music for an entire week. That's imagine if schools did maths on carousel, for one term a year, or did it, once a week with a visiting specialist that nobody took any interest in, and nobody in the school had any idea of, whether their kids could do the times tables. It'd be disgraceful. It'd be a national scandal, and that's what's happening in music in a lot of schools. So, and a lot of us do see it as quite scandalous, but I suppose it's difficult, because we need to, on the one hand, really encourage teachers to kind of try music out in a kind of fearless way, but also I think unfortunately we do need to hold them to account through some kind of system as well, to make sure that music is happening and not being neglected.
Yeah, it's really important. Thank you so much. So we're going to move on and talk to Anna Haywood, who, just like Jimmy's school, is featured in the annex case studies for the national plan. Anna, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. I wonder if you start by telling us, what was your route into leading music at the schools?
Yeah, so I've been teaching for about 20 years, variety of schools in England, in Wales, and probably about 5 years ago now, I think, when I was started teaching in a school in Banbury, Amwell Fields, full-time class teacher, with curriculum responsibility for music. So I was the music coordinator, which I'd always been as a teacher, as somebody who had a passion for music, who was a singer, who, played piano and guitar. It was kind of natural that I would take on that role. So I'd always been the music coordinator. But about 5 years ago, my head teacher at the time approached me and said, look, we want to do something about our musical offer. We want to look at how we can kind of develop the music offer. Would you be interested in taking on a role across 2 schools, partnership schools, within a couple of miles of each other, but making that your full role? So essentially coming out of the classroom, being a music lead, teaching music right across the school in 2 different schools. And obviously I jumped at the chance because I love teaching music. It was something I really, I'm really passionate about and really enjoy doing. And that's kind of how I ended up here, really, in this role.
So it was really interesting, quite different to Jimmy, who had come from a secondary background and into schools, and you have sort of found your niche within primary education. And what was the journey at the school in terms of like, where was it when you started, and what are the bits you had to put together to get it to where it is now?
Yeah. So when I started, it was quite piecemeal. We had a variety of different schemes, that some Music Express going on. It was all a little bit patchwork. So one of the first things I sort of looked at was that progression across the school, and how, what are the skills? I remember having a conversation a few years ago now with our key stage, with our secondary school music lead, and saying, well, what is it, what do you need them to come up with? What do our children in year 7 need to be able to do? And we sort of looked at that and thought, okay, so if that's what they need to be able to do at the end of year 6, how do we get there? And we sort of tracked it back to think about what are the skills that those children need to develop in order to be able to be ready, sort of secondary school ready, basically. And then in terms of how that's planned, I mean, I use the ISM framework and looked at the skills that they suggest as well, and sort of looked at how can we map that across our year groups. And obviously that's now sort of been superseded for me by the model music curriculum and the skills that they identify. But it's been quite organic, really. Things have changed and developed. I've tried things out and they haven't quite worked, and you kind of reflect and you adapt it. And I've taken resources from anywhere that's, anywhere I can find them, basically be a magpie, a little bit of Voices Foundation, a little bit of BBC 10 Pieces, wherever you find something that you think this is great and this is really going to engage our children and give them the language that they need. So Jimmy talked about Kadali, and I'm not Kadali trained, but I've kind of picked up bits and pieces along the way, basically seizing on any opportunity to learn for myself that I can, in order to then use that with the children. Yeah.
And Jimmy also mentioned about the accountability measures in schools and how he thinks that the introduction of deep dives has made a difference. Now, I know that you've been part of a deep dive, haven't you?
Yeah.
This is not an Ofsted webinar, but I just think whilst people are here, I wonder if you could share a few reflections on what that was like for you.
Yeah, it was really interesting. It was very, very interesting, because I think prior to that, as a school, we'd had training about Ofsted deep dives, and there's lots of information about what it looks like in geography and in history and in maths. And I think at that point, people were quite unsure about what would it actually look like in music. So my experience was that usually you'd have, your coordinated discussion. So you'd start with an overview of the curriculum and the planning, and then the inspector might then observe some lessons. So well, I'm the coordinator, we have that discussion. So now we're going to observe some lessons, that'll be me. And then we'll have a follow-up with the teachers to discuss those lessons. Yeah, that's me again. So it was very much, I was in that role, in all of those things. And we had some, it was a really interesting discussion around a lot of it around planning, around, what's your planning based on? How do you know that that's good? How do you know that that's what children need to be able to do? What does that actually look like? So you've got your overview of the skills you want. Okay, but how do you know what you're actually teaching in week 1 of term 3, or what are you teaching in term 4 in year 3? Really, the inspector was really quite keen to pin that down on how do you know what to teach and when to teach it. And I think that's what the new national plan will be so helpful for, because it really, as you said, it really gives that clarity around what does good look like, what should our children be entitled to, and also that collaboration with the Music Hub, and really sort of embedding that relationship in what schools can offer, and making it very clear what the role of the hub is to support the school, so that schools, I think, feel confident that they actually know what should a good music curriculum look like. And I was, what they didn't ask a great deal about was about assessment and evidence, which was what I was anticipating the big discussion to be around. So obviously that's such a massive challenge in music, is how you assess and evidence children's learning. And maybe at another point that will come. I think at this point they were just more interested in what is your curriculum, what's it based on. But yeah, it was a really, really positive experience, actually, bizarrely.
Yeah, that's really, very really refreshing to hear. And for people who are on this call who want to know more about what Anna does, that's in the annex. As I said, there's the case study, the structures, how it's all put together. And also you can look at her school's Ofsted report and have a look. Anna's being very modest, but music came out very well in the Ofsted report. So all this good stuff is happening, but it can't be without its challenges. What do you think, what are the biggest challenges you face? What makes your job difficult?
I think for me, the fact that I work across 2 different sites is a strength and a challenge, because in a way, I think that's what's actually made my role possible. We would all love music to be really high profile and well funded and resourced, and and that would be the aim, I'm sure, for every teacher and for every school. It's not about not valuing it, but it's about being realistic about constraints that schools have in terms of budget and timetable. So the fact that my, essentially the cost of employing me can be shared over 2 different schools helps to make that possible. But obviously then that does mean that my time that I've got in each school is reduced. And I, it's the importance of that collaboration with the other staff in the school, because I can only be in one school for 2 days a week, 2 or 3 days a week. So certainly the challenge for me, and the thing I really want to look at now that particularly now, as I said, we've got the national plan, and it's really kind of solidified what schools should be offering, is to look at how can I then work alongside other staff to develop their confidence and their skills, so that I'm not just the only person that's delivering music. So it becomes something that we as a school offer, rather than something that I go in and deliver. That would definitely be that's my next step.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's all part of the development plan, right? That we're going to be reflecting, and it's a way that you can engage your senior team in that as well, because to get the buy-in for everyone embracing music, that can't just come from you, that there needs to come from everybody else. But I know your schools, and I'm sure there'll be lots of enthusiasm for that kind of work, which is really good. And you are not, when you're working across 2 schools, you meet a lot of people and you meet a lot of families. What have you found in your community? Now, just to give context to everybody who's on the call, because you might not know where the schools are. So these schools are in Banbury, which is in North Oxfordshire. It's one of the most deprived wards in the region in Oxford. But the schools aren't exactly the same. They're slightly different. They serve different communities. Anna, what has been powerful in the way that you've been able to engage parents and carers?
I think the main thing for me is that the parents just love to see their children performing. They love to see their children having those opportunities. So we, look at any opportunity for the children, particularly in singing, particularly looking at choir. They sing in assembly, they sing at the summer fair, they sing at the Christmas fair. Whenever there's an opportunity, you sort of seize that for the children to be able to perform, because their parents love to see that. And it's kind of something having to try and rebuild, as you said, after COVID. It used to be that we would do a concert just in the school. Every term or so there would be a concert that parents could come in. There's no cost attached. It's within their community. So it's looking at rebuilding those things really. And another thing, actually, looking at one of the things that I've put in place this term is Year 3 children learning the recorder. And that was a conversation I had with the head here at Hillview last year, because we felt the children weren't getting that opportunity to become proficient in playing an instrument. That whole kind of whole class ensemble tuition. And we had a conversation around, well, what instrument should we use? And the recorder might not seem like the most exciting or glamorous of instruments, but we felt that actually this is something that's accessible to our children. Within our communities, if a child learns the cello and absolutely loves it, a lot of our families are not going to be able to buy a cello. So something like a recorder, although it's not very exciting, actually that's something that our families can buy if the child really enjoys it. And it can obviously lead to so many other things. It's that whole kind of gateway instrument into woodwinds and into music, being able to read music and all of those skills. So for me, that's about thinking about what makes this possible for our children to be able to access it. And as I said, we've got parents that are so supportive and are just very excited whenever they get the opportunity to see their children performing.
Yeah, well, I've got young children. I know you also have children as well. It's just wonderful, isn't it, when you can go into schools and have those really positive moments with the school. Yeah. Not that there are not positive moments with most young people in primary schools, but when you go in and it brings the whole community together, it really makes such a big difference.
Yeah, definitely.
Anna, we're going to have to wrap up this part of the webinar here, but thank you so much for sharing your insight. And as I said, if people want to find out more about your school, you can have a look in the annex. And of course, if you've got other questions, you can always approach through me. I'm catherine.barker@unitedlearning.org.uk. There's been a couple of questions through the chat, and before I wrap up with showing you the resources in the MTA, I thought I'd just address some of those. So somebody has asked about finding funding and how tricky it can be for schools, and I would absolutely concur that it can be not just tricky but so time consuming to put these things together and to put bids together. And Becky making the point that we need to have more advocacy for this kind of stuff. So where I've seen some real success, look, these pots are smaller. When more people are going towards them, it makes them even smaller. But in case you weren't aware, there's the UK Music Fund, which used to be the EMI Sound Foundation Fund, which is money for musical instruments up to a certain level per school. It's only £1,500, but you can apply for it every couple of years. But the bit that people often miss on that is that there is money for teacher CPD, which you can apply for. This is awesome, especially if you want to do something like a Gadai course, which is over a long term. I would really encourage you to apply. And the next application round, I think, is in August. So often people miss that because it's during the summer holidays. There are also things that I think primary schools tap into with great success, things like the big lottery funds, where you can demonstrate a case for, and we're trying to improve community engagement. We're trying to do something, and you're going to do that through the vehicle of music making. Sorry, Danielle, I'll say that again. That was UK Music, which used to be the EMI Sound Foundation. So just Google it. And there are, if you just search funding for music education, it usually pops up along like in one of the things in the Google drop down, and it's within their website. There's funds for musical instrument, and there's another tab which talks about funding for teacher CPD. So have a dig around on that website and see what you can find. Another thing I know has a lot of people have had success with local Rotary organisations, which can work really well. And also other sources of local funding where there are small local charities who can do bid making on a smaller level. So that really depends what area you're in, what's available and what's around. But I know, for example, where Anna is, the Rotary have really supported some of their schools, particularly the secondary school. And often then they'll invite you to come and do an event as part of that. So don't forget that there are these like grassroots organisations who are able to support as well. I think that was the main question. Links for fundings. I'll try and dig that out and stick it in just before the end, but I'm going to move on to just the final bit about resources. You've all been so patient and attentive as we head towards 6 o'clock, and no doubt tummies are rumbling and there might be children in the background who are needing attention, so I'll keep this really brief. I'm just going to share my screen for the last part of today's session to show you the Music Teachers Association website. So if you haven't seen this before, here is our, oh, is that still working? Great. So the Music Teachers Association has got it's our website, and within the platform, I'll just show you the homepage actually, so you see where to get to. This is our homepage at the moment. And if you click on this banner here, it takes you to the specific page about the national plan. There's a little bit of blurb which you can read in commentary from our president, Don. This link here will take you straight to the plan, but this one here, this blue tab, is a good one because that's a one-page summary. So if you want to print that off and put it under the nose of your head or line manager, or pop it across to the governors, that might be a useful thing for you to have to hand. And it's a summary for schools. There's a summary for hubs on the Music Mark website as well. And there's more resources like that on the Can Do Music page. And the government have actually they put some money or at least some time into creating a poster, which you can put up in your school. Everybody loves a poster. So yeah, get your poster and pop it in the school newsletter, I would say, is a lovely like PDF. Finally, at the bottom, there is this self-evaluation tool that the MTA have developed, which essentially has kind of distilled everything that's in the plan to make it easy for you to kind of benchmark where you think you might be on that journey. And this is what it looks like for the primary schools. It's been benchmarked not just against the plan, but other national tools, such as the Character Education Framework, which you might be aware of from the Jubilee Centre. If you don't know anything about that and you're interested in character, that's a really good one, but that's for totally another time. So the evaluation tool is in 4 categories: in the classroom, beyond the classroom, leadership and management, and the community and partnerships. And then, more stuff about Music Mark. So many great resources out there, aren't there, as Anna said. So this is what it looks like in practice. 4 categories. This is not Ofsted, this is not for inspection, this is just for people to be able to reflect and to sort of think, well, at the moment I might be in this box, but actually to get to the next one, this is what I would maybe need to do. So you can sort of reflect with honesty, but with ambition about where your strengths are and also where you might want to develop, just like you've heard Anna talking about now, how she wants to now have more influence across her wider school. Hopefully it's useful, and we'll be doing some separate webinars about that as we get into September. There's no rush on the development plan. Importantly, in the plan it talks about 23-24 for that, but I would argue there is no time to spare or to waste when it comes to the child, because children just have one go. So, you know, as I said, it's in our gift to make it happen. We've hit 6 o'clock. That's the end. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to Anna with her really useful insight, and to Jimmy as well, who joined us virtually. You're really warmly welcomed for MTA. If you're interested in finding out more, or even joining us at the cost of less than £2 a week, less than a cup of coffee, you can find a link to join us on our website. And otherwise, have a wonderful evening and a superb end of term and a very well-deserved summer holiday. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, Catherine. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Anna.